Japan has 90 days before its factories go dark. China just cut the supply chain that keeps the world's third largest economy alive. And Tokyo? They never saw it coming. On the 6th of January this year, a single announcement from Beijing sent shockwaves through boardrooms across Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. It wasn't a military threat. It wasn't a tariff hike. It was something far more surgical and far more devastating. China had just imposed sweeping export restrictions on Japan, targeting what are known as dual-use items. These are materials and technologies that can serve both civilian and military functions. Rare earth elements, gallium, germanium, high-precision machine tools, advanced alloys, all of it frozen at the border. For Japan, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an industrial earthquake, because these materials aren't luxury imports. They're embedded deep inside the machinery that makes Japan run. Electric motors, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, precision robotics, defense electronics, radar systems, wind turbines, hybrid car batteries. All of it depends on a steady flow of these elements. Industry analysts wasted no time running the numbers. If Japan can't secure alternative sources within the next 3 months, the damage won't be isolated to one or two companies. It will be systemic, a cascading failure across multiple industries. The estimated loss, around 660 billion yen, and that's a conservative estimate. So what just happened? Why did Beijing decide to pull the plug on one of its most important trading partners? And more importantly, can Japan survive this? If you want to stay updated on stories like this, stories that explain the hidden forces shaping our world, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You'll get every new video we release straight to your feed. Now let's break this down. To understand why this move hit Japan so hard, you need to understand how Japan's economy actually works. Japan doesn't compete on volume, it competes on precision. The country has built its entire modern economic identity around high-value, high-complexity manufacturing. We're talking about industries where a single miscalculation at the micron level can ruin an entire product batch. Precision machinery, automotive engineering, semiconductor fabrication equipment, industrial robotics, medical devices, aerospace components. These aren't just profitable sectors. They're the pillars holding up the entire structure. And at the heart of all of this, a group of elements most people have never heard of: rare earth elements. Despite the name, rare earths aren't actually rare in terms of total global abundance. What makes them special is how difficult they are to extract, refine, and process into usable industrial materials. And Japan needs them for almost everything it makes. Neodymium and dysprosium go into the powerful magnets used in electric vehicle motors. Europium and terbium light up the screens of smartphones and televisions. Cerium polishes the lenses in cameras and semiconductors. Lanthanum is essential for hybrid car batteries. Without these elements, Japan's factories don't just slow down, they stop. But here's the problem. Japan is an archipelago made up of more than 6,800 islands. It has mountains, forests, and coastline. What it doesn't have is rare earth deposits worth mining. Current estimates put Japan's identified rare earth reserves at around 50,000 tons. That might sound like a lot until you realize it represents less than 1% of the world's total. And even those deposits are low-grade, scattered, and economically unviable to extract. So Japan has had to import, and for decades it imported from one place more than anywhere else: China. By 2010, more than 90% of Japan's rare earth imports were coming from Chinese mines and refineries. That level of dependence made Japan vulnerable. And in the autumn of that year, that vulnerability was exposed in the most dramatic way possible. It started with a fishing boat. In September 2010, a Chinese trawler was operating near a cluster of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. Japan calls them the Senkaku Islands. China calls them the Diaoyu Islands. Both nations claim sovereignty. During a routine patrol, the Japanese Coast Guard intercepted the vessel. A confrontation followed. The Chinese captain was arrested and detained. Tokyo announced it would prosecute him under Japanese law. From Beijing's perspective, this was unacceptable. The islands, in China's view, are Chinese territory. Arresting a Chinese national, there wasn't law enforcement. It was a violation of sovereignty. What happened next caught Japan completely off guard. China didn't issue formal sanctions. It didn't announce a trade embargo. Instead, it did something quieter and more effective. It slowed down rare earth exports to Japan. Export quotas were tightened. Approval processes were delayed. Customs inspections became more thorough. Shipments that used to clear in days now took weeks, and rare earth supplies to Japan began to dry up. For about 7 weeks, Japan's rare earth pipeline went from a steady flow to a trickle. The impact was immediate. Automakers like Toyota and Honda saw production lines stall. Battery manufacturers couldn't secure the materials they needed. Electronics companies faced delays. Export volumes dropped. Japanese officials tried to downplay the situation publicly, but behind closed doors, panic was setting in. The entire industrial complex was built on the assumption that trade would remain stable no matter what. That assumption had just been shattered. In the end, Tokyo had no choice. The Chinese captain was released, and a few months later, rare earth shipments resumed. But the damage was done. Not in economic terms necessarily, but in psychological ones. Japan had learned a hard lesson. Dependence on a single supplier is a strategic vulnerability, and if that supplier ever decides to use that leverage, there's very little you can do. So Japan embarked on a long-term project to reduce its reliance on China. Between 2010 and 2020, Japan poured resources into breaking its rare earth dependency. Step 1. Find new suppliers. Japanese companies began investing heavily in rare earth projects outside of China. One of the biggest bets was in Australia, where Japan helped fund the Linus Corporation's mining and processing operations. The hope was that Australian rare earths could replace Chinese imports, but the results were mixed. Australia could provide light rare earths, elements like cerium and lanthanum, which are more abundant and easier to extract. But heavy rare earths, the high-value elements like dysprosium and terbium, remained scarce, and even when alternative sources were found, they still required Chinese refineries to turn raw ore into usable products. Step 2. Redesign products to use fewer rare earths. Japanese engineers went back to the drawing board. They developed new motor designs that used less neodymium. They experimented with alternative magnet materials like ferrite. They optimized software and algorithms to compensate for weaker magnetic fields. It worked, to a degree. Motors still functioned, but performance dropped, efficiency declined, and costs went up. Step 3. Recycling. Japan became a world leader in urban mining, the process of extracting rare earths from discarded electronics. Old smartphones, hard drives, and batteries were dismantled and processed to recover valuable elements. Again, it helped. But the economics were brutal. Recycling rare earths cost several times more than simply importing them. It was a hedge, not a solution. Step 4. International partnerships. Japan joined rare earth alliances, including one led by India. The idea was to pool resources and share supply chains. But even with these efforts, progress was slow. By 2023, the numbers told the story. Japan imported roughly 7,784 tons of rare earths that year. Of that total, 5,700 tons came from China. That's more than 70%. After more than a decade of trying to diversify, Japan was still overwhelmingly dependent on Chinese rare earths. Why? Because China's dominance isn't just about having the resources. It's about controlling the entire value chain. Here's something most people don't realize. China doesn't have the world's largest rare earth reserves. Countries like Vietnam, Brazil, and Russia all have significant deposits. Australia has plenty. Even the United States has rare earths sitting underground. So why does China dominate the market? Because mining is only the beginning. What matters is what comes after. Rare earth ore, when it's first pulled from the ground, is mixed with rock, dirt, and other elements. It's useless in that form. To turn it into something an engineer can actually use, you need to separate the individual elements, refine them to extremely high purity, and process them into metals, oxides, or alloys. That process is technically complex, environmentally hazardous, and expensive. It requires specialized facilities, trained workers, and decades of operational experience. China has all of that, and almost no one else does. Over the past 30 years, China has built the most advanced rare earth refining infrastructure in the world. It has the technology, it has the scale, it has the cost efficiency, and crucially, it has the willingness to absorb the environmental damage that rare earth processing inevitably causes. This gives China leverage that goes far beyond just owning the mines. Even if Japan sources rare earth ore from Australia, that ore still needs to be sent to China for processing. Even if the United States reopens old mines, those raw materials still flow to Chinese refineries. China doesn't just supply rare earths, it controls the bottleneck. And now, Beijing has decided to tighten the valve. So why did China choose this moment to hit Japan with export controls? The answer lies in a series of statements made by Japan's Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba. In recent months, Ishiba has taken an increasingly hard line on Taiwan. He's publicly stated that if China were to use military force against Taiwan, and if that action posed a threat to Japan's security, it could constitute what he called an existential threat situation. In diplomatic language, that's about as close as you can get to saying Japan would intervene. For Beijing, this crossed a red line. Taiwan is considered a core issue of national sovereignty. Any suggestion that Japan might involve itself militarily is taken extremely seriously. China issued formal warnings. It demanded that Ishiba walk back his comments. But instead of softening his rhetoric, the Prime Minister doubled down. He repeated similar statements on multiple occasions, in front of both domestic and international audiences. Beijing's response was swift. First, it banned all imports of Japanese seafood, citing concerns over contamination from treated water released from the Fukushima nuclear plant. The real message was clear. Economic consequences follow political decisions. Then came the rare earth restrictions. And just one day later, China launched an anti-dumping investigation into dichloromethane, a chemical product widely exported by Japanese companies. The investigation period was set at 1 year, with the possibility of a 6-month extension. Japanese firms were told they must fully cooperate or face punitive measures. 2 announcements, 2 days, both aimed directly at Japan's industrial core. And the Japanese government? They were blindsided. The reaction in Japan's financial markets was immediate. On the day the announcement was made, stocks in the chemical sector plunged. Shin-Etsu Chemical, one of Japan's largest producers of silicon wafers and specialty chemicals, hit its daily loss limit. So did Mitsui Chemicals. Investors weren't waiting to see how bad things might get, they were getting out. The automotive sector took a hit too. Toyota's share price dropped more than 5%. Honda followed. Nissan wasn't far behind. Analysts understood what this meant. Without rare earths, production lines can't operate. Without production, there are no cars to sell. Without sales, there's no revenue. The math was simple and honestly, pretty terrifying. Inside corporate boardrooms, procurement teams scrambled to assess their exposure. How much inventory did they have on hand? How long could they keep production running before stocks ran out? For many companies, the answer was somewhere between 2 and 3 months. And that timeline assumed no further disruptions, no delays in shipments from other countries, no unexpected demand spikes, just smooth operations from here on out. That was optimistic at best. One procurement director, speaking to Japanese media on the condition of anonymity, admitted that 70% of his company's material orders came from China. All of those orders were now frozen. Production schedules, he said, were in chaos. What made the situation even worse was the lack of warning. Most executives had assumed that no matter how strained diplomatic relations became, trade would continue. After all, economic interdependence was supposed to act as a stabilizer. A shared interest in prosperity would keep things functional. That assumption had just been proven wrong. So what is Japan going to do? One option has been on the table for years, but until now it's been treated more as a research project than a viable plan. Deep-sea rare earth mining. Just 2 weeks after China announced the export controls, Japan's Marine Research Agency dispatched its exploration vessel, the Chikyu, to the waters surrounding an island called Minami Torishima. It's Japan's easternmost territory, a tiny speck of land in the Pacific Ocean. But legally, it allows Japan to claim an exclusive economic zone covering roughly 400,000 square kilometers of ocean. And beneath that ocean, at depths averaging 6,000 meters, lies mud. Lots of it. And that mud, according to years of sampling and analysis, is rich in rare earth elements. In fact, the concentrations found in some of these deep-sea sediments are several times higher than what you'd find in a typical land-based rare earth deposit. And crucially, the mix of elements skews heavily toward heavy rare earths, the exact type Japan struggles most to secure. If this deposit could be extracted and processed, the reserves alone could supply Japan for hundreds of years. But there's a reason no one has done this before. Mining at a depth of 6,000 meters is an engineering nightmare. The pressures are immense. The equipment required is extraordinarily expensive. Transporting sediment from the ocean floor to the surface and then processing it into usable materials would cost far more than simply buying rare earths on the open market. Some estimates suggest that extracting 1 ton of deep-sea rare earth ore could cost as much as buying several tons of conventional rare earths from established suppliers. And that's assuming the technology even works at scale. Then there's the environmental issue. Deep-sea mining disrupts ecosystems that scientists barely understand. Once Japan moves toward large-scale operations, it will face international backlash. Environmental groups will protest. Neighboring countries will raise concerns. Diplomatic friction will increase. But perhaps the biggest obstacle is this. Even if Japan successfully brings rare earth ore up from the ocean floor, it still needs to refine it. And refining rare earths at an industrial scale? That's still something China does better than anyone else. What we're watching unfold right now is bigger than rare earths. It's bigger than Japan. This is about how economic power is being weaponized in the 21st century. For decades, the global economy operated under a framework where trade was separated from politics. Countries might disagree on ideology, on borders, on alliances. But commerce was supposed to be neutral ground. Markets were supposed to be rational. Supply chains were supposed to be stable. That framework is breaking down. We've seen it with semiconductors. We've seen it with energy. And now we're seeing it with rare earths. Countries that control critical resources are realizing they have leverage, and they're increasingly willing to use it. China's move against Japan isn't just about punishing a political statement. It's a signal. A demonstration of what's possible when you control a choke point in the global supply chain. And Japan isn't the only country paying attention. South Korea is watching. Taiwan is watching. The United States is watching. Europe is watching. Everyone is asking the same question. How vulnerable are we? Because if China can do this to Japan, one of the most advanced industrial economies in the world, it can do it to anyone. So where does this leave Japan? In the short term, the country has options. It can draw down existing stockpiles. It can negotiate with alternative suppliers. It can slow production in non-essential sectors to conserve materials. It can accelerate recycling programs. It can push harder on deep-sea exploration, even if the economics don't make sense yet. But none of these are permanent solutions. Japan's industrial model is built on complexity, precision, and efficiency. That model requires rare earths. And right now, The most reliable source of those rare earths has just been cut off. The clock is ticking, and the world is watching to see what happens when the assembly lines start to go quiet. Because if Japan, with all its technological sophistication and financial resources, can't solve this problem, what does that mean for everyone else? The global economy is changing. Supply chains that once seemed unshakable are being tested. Resources that were taken for granted are now being used as tools of influence. If you want to understand these shifts as they happen, if you want to see the forces shaping the world before they make the headlines, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We'll keep bringing you the stories that matter, the ones that explain not just what's happening, but why it's happening. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.